it many times to different members of the community and the public and the press. I like to see myself not as a victim so much, but rather a survivor to an attack. I survived. Many of us do and will. But this is not something that we need to endure. We should not have to endure this type of thing. And I still recounted the incident whereas the concrete block landed on my head. I didn't know what happened. I just thought it was an accident. It wasn't until my wife yelled at the perpetrator to stop, and when they continued to throw additional stuff down, and eventually they gave her this awful expression, this hateful expression, do I realize that was not an accident. It was actually a deliberate attack. How do you reason with all of that? Because there's no easy way to reason with it. But the only way that I have been able to come up with after days and days of sort of soul searching, how do I explain to my 15 and 14-year-old children as to what happened, is that God did this on purpose and put this brick on my head to wake me up and to ask me to continue to work for the people that I represent, and along with everyone in this audience today, every single one of our elected officials here today. I mean, we must take bold and swift action, whether it's legislatively or budget priority-wise, to combat these hateful crimes. Violence has no place in this country. Hatred has no place in this country. I didn't prepare anything today coming here, but I just want to be able to support all my members of my communities. Many people they send me a lot of warm regards, encouragement words, supportive expressions, and they ask me, so why don't you wear your neck brace? The doctor gave you one. You should stay home for a few days. But all of us here in the audience who got elected to serve our community, we got elected to serve you. We're here to protect all of you. So if I may, Congressman, on behalf of all the elected officials here tonight, this afternoon, I want to tell everyone in the audience and those in front of the camera, we will not stop working for your safety until you feel safe again. And that's all I got for everyone today. Thank you.
Well, we heard from Dr. Zhang, we heard from Councilmember Fung. This isn't going away until all of us come together to educate and inform and be our brothers and sisters. So now I'm going to ask Speaker Pro Tem of the Assembly, Kevin Mullen, to tell us what's happening on a state level. I'll follow up with what's happening on a federal level, and then we'll have some opportunity to hear from others, and then we're going to open it up for a discussion.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman, and thank you, Anders, for your courage, your inspiration, and for that call to action and reminder, frankly. Thank you for that. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Congresswoman Spear, for convening this gathering and bringing us together to have a much-needed conversation on how we can address hate and violence against our AAPI community members. And thank you, of course, Congresswoman, for your decades of moral leadership, this town hall being just the very latest example in that regard. Let me just say, an attack on any member of our community is an attack on us all. The hate we have seen over the last 2 years directed at the AAPI community cannot and will not be tolerated. At the state level, we've taken numerous steps to address the issue. During last year's legislative session, the State Assembly passed H.R. 23, introduced by my colleague, Assemblymember Evan Lowe from the South Bay, and I was proud to support this resolution as a co-author. The resolution condemns hate crimes, hateful rhetoric, and hateful acts against members of our Asian and Pacific Islander communities. In addition, the legislature last year, as an early budget action, approved $1.4 million in funding to help fight anti-Asian violence and racism through the Stop AAPI Hate Reporting Center. This funding supported the organization's efforts to research and track anti-Asian incidents. As part of last year's larger state budget, California made an investment of $156 million to address discrimination and rising hate crimes. Funding went to support community organizations providing victim compensation, counseling, and crime prevention. This year, I was proud to support AB 1947 by my Assembly colleague just to the north of here, Assemblymember Phil Ting. That legislation, AB 1947, requires local law enforcement agencies to develop specific hate crime policies. These policies should include a definition of hate crimes, procedures on handling said crimes, and a method of reporting related statistics. The legislature is also considering Senate Bill 1161 by my upper house colleague, Senator Dave Min. That bill would require the top 10 public transit operators to develop and implement a plan to reduce harassment experienced by its riders and to consider the safety concerns and needs of riders impacted by harassment when planning, designing, and operating their respective systems. Outside of the legislature, our State Attorney General, Rob Bonta, announced the creation of the Racial Justice Bureau as part of the state's Department of Justice. The purpose of this task force is to combat statewide systemic racism and improve reporting and prosecution of these cases. DOJ will also work with local law enforcement to advance their policies. So let me say unequivocally, hate has no place in California and will not be tolerated. Rather than turn on each other, it's time to come together and unite against any form of bigotry and hatred. Let us rise above the hate and vitriol and work together to ensure our communities are the welcoming and inclusive places we aspire for them to be. So thank you all for your good work, and thank you for the opportunity to be with you today.
You're a little taller, Kevin. So there's a theme that you're going to hear with these pieces of legislation, and it's an opportunity, I think, for all of us to talk about whether or not on a council level in each of the cities we should create task force to address ethnic and racial bias and concerns. But I'll tell you what's happening on a federal level. H.R. 1843 by Grace Ming is requiring the DOJ, Department of Justice, to perform an expedited review of COVID-19 hate crimes. And additionally, the Department and Health and Human Services is required to issue guidance on best practices for mitigating racially discriminatory language in describing the COVID-19 pandemic. H.Res. 151 condemns all forms of anti-Asian sentiment as related to COVID-19. Again, this was introduced by Congresswoman Grace Ming. It calls on federal officials to investigate and document all credible reports of hate crimes, harassment, bullying, and threats against the Asian American and Pacific Islander communities. It also directs the AG to work with state and local agencies and AAPI community-based organizations to prevent discrimination and expand education campaigns on public reporting of hate crimes. H.Res. 981 commemorates the one-year anniversary on March 16, 2021, the shootings in Atlanta, Georgia, and denouncing anti-Asian hate, sponsored by Assemblywoman Judy Chu. You may recall that 8 people were murdered. They were all working at Asian spas. There were 3 separate shootings, 8 victims, 7 were women, 6 were women of Asian descent, and several were immigrants. HRES 275 condemning the horrific shooting in Atlanta, Georgia on March 16th as well, again sponsored by Congresswoman Chu, reaffirming the House commitment to combating hate, bigotry, and violence against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. And then HR 1834, the Hate Crimes Commission Act of 2021, sponsored by Congressman Krishnamurthy. This would establish a commission on hate crimes tasked with investigating and reporting whether hate crimes have increased, factors that contribute to the increase, policies and actions by law enforcement agencies to reduce the commission of these crimes, and successful community bias prevention responses. Now, these have all been introduced. They haven't become law, but it's important to put a spotlight on them and then look at ways that we can do things locally, because in the end, that's where it happens. So I'm hopeful as we move through this program, we'll find ways to do just that. Now I'd like to invite up District Attorney Steve Wagstaff, who can explain to us the legal elements of a hate crime. There you are.
Thank you very much. Not as tall as you, but a little taller than you, so we'll find the middle. Thank you for letting me speak here today. It is in San Mateo County, as was noted, we're not immune from this. We have the crimes that my office prosecutes. And unlike what we were advised by Congresswoman Spear about nationwide, the percentages and the groups that are most targeted, in San Mateo County, the cases that we prosecute, the cases brought to us, well over 3/4 of them involve AAPI crimes. They're the target in San Mateo County. There are others. We just convicted a man last month of hate crime against a family in Burlingame, eating a meal in Burlingame on Burlingame Avenue simply because they wore a shirt that said that Black Lives Matter. And we convicted him of a felony just about a month ago, and he will be sentenced next month. It is abhorrent crimes that we do not accept. The law, though, there's a difference. As Doctor noted for us, there is a difference between engaging in hate conduct, engaging in hate language, and that which is a crime under California law. Our legislature had to very carefully, when it drafted this law, make a note that there is the First Amendment right of free speech. And yes, the right of free speech does include our Supreme Court and other, in many cases have said it, hate language alone is protected. And our law, 422.75 of the Penal Code, you can Google it and read it if you want to see the language, it requires more than simply hate language. It requires hate language and conduct. So for instance, when last year there was an Asian American woman out walking her dog on Hillcrest Boulevard, a stone's throw from here, and a man came out of his house screaming hate language at her, AAPI hate language at her, and as she moved away, that's not a crime under California law because it is language. It's wrong, it's hate, it's an incident of hate that gets logged, but it is not a crime. What made it a crime, and we are still prosecuting him, is that he then pushed her. It took conduct for that to occur. Just like when I mentioned that case on Burlingame Avenue. If that man had just spewed his hatred for the concept of Black Lives Matter, there would be no crime for us to prosecute. Instead, it's when he took the table and pushed the table they were seated at that we then were able to bring it in the criminal justice system. And because we have to work within the Constitution, that is nothing that I can go to Assemblyman Mullen saying, hey, we need to change that. There is one other area that we've given some consideration to that perhaps we can change. Because in addition to it involving conduct, hate plus conduct, the conduct has to be that's engaged, done for hate purposes. And let me give you an example of that. Last summer, there was an anti-AAPI violence rally over at Central Park in San Mateo. I was there, and shortly after that, I know Chief Barberini, San Mateo Police Chief in the back will remember this, shortly afterward, there was an Asian American woman, elderly woman, walking back from the market. And two guys came up and mugged her and robbed her. They were convicted, excellent police work found there, because they then went and committed some crimes in San Bruno and other places, caught them, we prosecute them, but we could not charge a hate crime because you have to be able to show that the conduct was done for the purposes of hate. And so that's where our law is, and maybe we can switch that somewhat. I don't know, I've given that some thought, that maybe we can do something in our legislature about that. Because, you know, when somebody mentioned just a moment ago about transit, crimes on transit, and the law being done there, and the efforts being made in that, I'm thinking, you know, there is the law makes it a crime, elevated crime to commit a battery against a transit worker. So if somebody, and we have prosecuted a lot of these too, because there are people that have attacked Caltrain operators, bus operators. And the law does not require that the culprit, the offender, even knows that that person is a transit person. It doesn't have to be done for the intent of that. When somebody commits a molestation against a child, it is not required that they know that the child is under 13 for the elevated penalty. It's just, the phrase is, you take the victim as the victim appears before you. Maybe we can see, we'd have to check with the constitutional authorities as to whether we can do something on that. But the main message that I do want to follow up with here, that is the law. We do prosecute these cases. San Mateo County, fortunately, like everywhere else in San Mateo County, you know, we have one of the lowest crime rates here because of a wonderful population, outstanding law enforcement with police chiefs, our sheriff-elect's Corpus's office, but we still have them. We have prosecuted several dozen of these crimes, and they're always hateful. And every time I hear about one, when I heard last weekend what happened to Councilmember Fung, it was not just, oh, there's another crime. It was, on my part, I felt both indignation and anger at it. And wishing, actually not knowing at that initial part, hoping it was in our county so that if they do capture the culprits, we can prosecute it and make sure that justice gets done. But we do prosecute these cases. Every single hate case in this county, we prosecute 20,000 cases a year. Every single one that involves a hate crime has to come through me. I want to know it, I want to hear about it, because this is a problem in our world that I want to give particular attention to. But I think, as our wonderful artist here told everybody, it's got to be all of us. Law enforcement, our legislators, our leaders, they can do everything, but they just give the tools. And let me give you examples of where that can happen, where all of you do make the difference. Let me go back. I've been a prosecutor for 45 years in this county. And early in my career, one of the things that changed the public, where the public got involved and changed for public safety, drunk driving, Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. It's about 40 years. It was 1981 where that all changed. And you know what? Within 2 years, the number of prosecutions of drunk driving in San Mateo County, it had been a steady 10,000 prosecutions a year, went down to about 3,000. And now we're at about 2,500. It has stayed down because the community got involved. We'll talk more recently, human trafficking. With the lead of our leaders, with Congresswoman Spear leading and being a wonderful prod to all of us in law enforcement, and meeting with us and saying, what are you doing? To the police chiefs, the sheriff, myself, and making sure that we put this at the top priority, we've made the difference. Our human trafficking issue does not match those of any of the counties surrounding us, and in big part it is because the community said no. And everybody was worried after the Super Bowl down in Santa Clara that, okay, it'll cease, it'll slip into the background, and it didn't. It's still a high priority, and it's because of the leadership and the public saying, we don't accept it. This is no different. This is going to be whatever law enforcement does, what our leaders do, it needs to be the community that gets outraged when things like what happened last weekend occurred and said, no more. No more. And I know you will, because every one of you is here today for that very purpose. So I thank all of you for being here, and what you get to be is the clarion. You get to go out there and tell all your friends and tell your family about what you learned today. and how you can make a difference, how you can spread the word that we don't accept this. And it can work. It isn't empty. It isn't something that stays in this floor, in this room, after you leave today. Because you will now be part of the team that's going to bring an end to this and say we don't accept it. And with that, I appreciate having you all being on our team in law enforcement and criminal justice.
So, Steve, you say that there has to be some action. So, in these cases, someone will push. But if someone just stalks, doesn't touch, but stalks someone, does that rise? Did you all hear me? Okay.
Yeah. If it qualifies as stalking. It wouldn't have to be a touch, but it would have to be stalking, and stalking would not be one incident. One time walking down the street. Stalking is an ongoing thing. It can be a threat. If the person threatens, puts in a threat. But if it was very simply something like that man did out here on Hillcrest Boulevard until he pushed her, that brought it in our territory, if it was simply blaming everything, as was noted earlier, blaming COVID on the Asian American population, that sort of thing, that by itself will not do it. It takes something that fits into another crime. And if we can do that, that's why we're always looking for that. We always want to make sure we have that. And if we have that, I assure you, law enforcement is going to investigate it, and they're going to bring it to us, and we're going to prosecute the person. And I'll finish by saying, the people we have prosecuted, they really have fallen into two categories. Mentally ill. We've had a great number of mentally ill people who are hearing it from others, are learning from others. They're not thinking on their own, and then they spew the hate. And people who are simply committing violent crimes, robberies, street robberies, whatever it may be, but throw in the added element. They know there's a vulnerability. We had that case of the woman in Daly City who was knocked down on street, on camera. Everybody could see it. And comments were made about her being Asian. They're the easy target thing. And again, what we do is, as a community, I so like the words you utter. You see it, you don't stay silent. You say something. You report it. We partner with law enforcement. So, thank you all very much.
All right, one more speaker, and then we're going to open it up to comments, questions, thoughts. Sean Bradstreet, who is the special agent in charge with the U.S. Secret Service. We thank you so much for being here on this Saturday. Thank you, Sean.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I appreciate the invitation and Congresswoman Spears and your whole office and all the work that you've done here. I just want to talk briefly on a crime that we're seeing on the financial side that's targeting the Asian community. So with that, it's called pig slaughtering or pig butchering is a common scheme that we're seeing in our office. And if you get the chance, I would Google it when you go home and you can kind of learn a little more about it, but I'll tell you what it's about at a very high level. Again, all the victims that we've seen come into our office have all been Asian, so it's targeting that community specifically. But it deals with a suspect meeting a victim, and usually it's through WhatsApp. It could be on a dating site or any other social network platform. And it could be as simple as trying to get communication somehow. If as simple as, hey, is my appointment still on for tomorrow? And getting somebody to respond. And that way they get them in. And then they start talking to him about investing and how to make money through cryptocurrency, because it seems to be the rage that is going on right now. So then, eventually, over time, they develop their relationship, even though they've never seen each other in person, they've never seen each other in video. When they call the suspect back, they never pick up the phone, but the suspect always calls them back, eventually. And they talk them into investing approximately $1,000, $2,000, $3,000. So they'll invest $2,000 into this website. They believe it's a good investment. It's actually usually going overseas somewheres, and they're actually showing them this nice graph and chart on this website. And usually over the course of like 3 days, their $2,000 has tripled, and it's turned into like $6,000. And this is the part that they call fattening the pig. So it's very common. Sometimes the money actually comes back into their account, and they see the $6,000. Sometimes it's just displayed on the computer screen. where you see the $6,000. Usually a week will go by, they'll continue to communicate, and they'll be like, hey, there's this other great opportunity. We'll think we'll be able to make more money based on the way the market is in the crypto ecosystem right now. Well, when they go back to the victim, this time, they're not investing a few $1,000s. They're not even investing $10,000. They're usually investing hundreds of thousands of dollars at this point. And they've convinced their family members also to invest in this crime. And I would say on average, a victim usually loses about $180,000 to this crime. It's not uncommon for us to see $700,000, over $1 million into this investment scheme. So obviously when you invest in there, they do not give the money back at that point. That's where they slaughter the pig. And that's usually the end of it. And they're like, hey, if you need your money back, you got to give us additional money. You got to pay taxes on this. And they keep trying to get as much as they can. And we've actually, dealing with Congresswoman Spears' office, actually started a task force up out of our San Francisco office that is specific just on these pig slaughtering scams that are going on. Because it's not only rampant here in San Mateo County, but even throughout the Bay Area and even nationally right now. But the number one thing that we can do is to educate people. So when you go back to your homes, definitely educate your family members, your neighbors, your friends about the scheme that is going on and kind of targeting our nation. But I'll be here afterwards. I'll be sticking around for a while to answer any questions. And if you know someone that is a victim, please reach out to our office. The sooner you reach out, the higher the likelihood that we'll get the stolen funds back. If a couple months go by, it's very difficult for us to retrieve the funds. So the sooner we get the response, the better. But with that being said, thank you very much, and I appreciate the invitation.
Okay, I misspoke. We have two more speakers. They're going to come up together, Dr. Shiyu Zhang and Stephanie Mullen. Dr. Zhang is a psychologist at Northeast Medical Services, and Stephanie Mullen is an expressive arts therapist.
Okay, thank you everyone, and especially Congresswoman Jackie Spear. We appreciate your decades of service, especially for the Filipino community and the Filipino veterans, the work you've done there, and the elected officials. I really have something prepared, but I just want to take a pause for a second, because I feel like there's been a lot of witnessing of testimony and talk about collective trauma. And, I think it's appropriate just to kind of take a breath. This is a lot to download, to process within an hour, and just, hopefully you're holding some grace for yourself as you're listening to testimony. So again, my name is Stephanie Mullen. I go by pronouns she, her. I am a co-chair of the Filipino Mental Health Initiative, and I'm also a co-founder and senior director of Kapwa Cultural Center and Cafe in Daly City. We are Filipino Mental Health Initiative is part of 9 health equity initiatives under BHRS, which is under Office of Diversity and Equity. And we have Shiyu here with me, who is also representing one of the 3 Asian initiatives. So we have the Filipino Mental Health Initiative, Chinese Health Initiative, and the Pacific Islander Initiative. And so what we do is we advocate and support changes needed to keep our historically marginalized communities healthy and safe, especially what's happening now with the harm and violence our communities are experiencing. And yes, I come to you as a mental health clinician, and I also come here as a mother, daughter, and concerned community member. I'm tired of hearing of the violence against our AAPI people and our broader BIPOC communities, and unfortunately, this is not new. This has been happening for centuries here on stolen land, which brings up so many feelings. There's a flurry of feelings ranging from powerlessness, grief, and anger. And it was mentioned earlier about being scared about, walking down the street. My parents are in their 80s, and that incident that happened to the 9-year-old in Daly City was like down the street. So this is real. And I'm sensing I'm not alone in this feeling of a threat to our safety. And so I'm hoping that, as we address this collective trauma, racial trauma, as Dr. Russell Jung mentioned, that it's both on an individual and communal level, which means it requires more opportunities to heal collectively and strengthen community care practices, such as the arts. Arts is healing. It's a way to metabolize these really difficult subjects, and then also bringing awareness. It ignites dialogue. It's healing. And so as an expressive art therapist, that's when we talk about call to action and healing, these are the creative, collective ways we can do that as a community. And the other things you can do, to address the individual and communal stress and anxiety, depression that you might be feeling, check in on your loved ones. Reach out and attend community healing spaces like this. Considering the emotional labor and potential trauma responses one may be experiencing, proactive healing could also mean simply taking a pause through restorative rest. This rest and recovery is essential to sustaining the forward movement. I find comfort in chances like today to address these emotions and think critically on how to co-create an anti-racist community. Because it's time to break the silence, to reclaim our voice, and work more intentionally on dismantling these systems of oppression built on white supremacy that were designed to keep us quiet and cause harm not only to our AAPI communities, but our brown and black siblings as well. So thank you for the opportunity for us to speak, and I'm going to pass it along to Shiu.
Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Shiu Zhang. Thank you, Congresswoman Jackie Spear, for this opportunity, and it's very good to be here and talk to you about this very important issue. My voice is shaking a little bit because I don't really talk in spaces like this, and also it's a lot to hear everyone. It is triggering, it's sad, just to hear our community struggling, and they've been struggling in the last 2 years. And, I wear this shirt, I'm so sorry. I wear this shirt, More Boba Less Hate. This is actually a sign that I designed when I went to one of the rallies Stephanie helped organize a year ago in Daly City. That was right after the shooting in Atlanta. And I didn't know that today this shirt is still relevant and this issue is still relevant. So I'm just really sad that, we're still talking about this. So today I'm gonna just kind of tell you what are some things that we have done in the past, so give you some ideas of how you can support your communities as community leaders, as community members. So as this, Jackie Spears, Congresswoman, mentioned that I'm a psychologist at Northeast Medical Services. So I do individual interventions for Asians, and our NAMS is predominantly serving the Asian Pacific Islander community. So in our individual treatments, patients bring up, they've been harassed on the street all the time. And in the past, we were not sure whether this is racially charged or not, but after 2 years, I just keep hearing our community being struggling. Even though they're not gonna be identified as hate crimes, we know that they are targeted because of who they are. So, we can do that in the individual level, but there's a lot we can do on a community level as well. So in the past, before I joined the Northeast Medical Service as a psychologist, I actually worked with the Behavioral Health Recovery Services as a Chinese Health Initiative community outreach worker and also the co-chair. So some of the examples of, actions that we have done in the past is I think this was April 2020, we started an online workshop called Coping with Xenophobia. This was when people are just starting to working from home, everything's virtual, so we did a 6-session workshop all in Chinese for the Chinese community to really get together, learn some of the coping skills, some of our own Asian American history, and then just have a healing space together. We also developed a handout. It's actually outside if you want to, take a copy. Again, it's 2 years old, but some of the information are still relevant, and then you can still learn from how to cope, what happens when you're a bystander, and what are some of the resources. So that's a good information to have. And then, I also co-founded this group called Mental Health Awareness Initiative, actually started in Mills High School. So Lucas, if you're available next year, feel free to come and join us. We train young people to be interested in mental health and then to be the future therapist. Because I think, in the Asian culture, a lot of us are told to be the doctors, the nurses, the engineers, but I think we need more mental health professionals. Just, you see us and then you trust us so they can come to us and really heal together. And I just think the last thing I want to say is just, I want you to really look around in the room and who's here. And this is, Stop AAPI Hate event. And then the people that are represented in the room, it's who are we, right? Is it going to be different people if we're here for Black Lives Matters or for the women's movement or for any other issue like LGBT issue, who's here? And we are here together, and we want to support, our own communities, support each other, but it was also asking support from other communities. On the other issues as well, we want to bring solidarities together. When they stand together, we can fight, and we can fight together and just be strong together. Thank you so much.
Okay. I think Stephanie was right. We do need to take a big breath of air and recognize that this is a lot. So we're going to open it up now to questions, comments, experiences you've had. Yes. The microphone's going to come to you.
Yes, Jackie. It's good to see you again, and I wish you luck in retirement when you complete your final term in Congress. My question, and I've discussed this with the DA Steve Westgate.
I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Can you hear me now, Jackie? Okay, let me. I had a talk with Steve Westgate on the way up here to your town hall, and the question I have for him and I have for you: when you have a man supposed to be a former president still stirring it up, okay, what can we do? You got a man. I mean, he is completely bonkers. And then some. I mean, I appreciate what everybody's doing here. I fully support it. But every time I turn on MSNBC, his group, I have to turn them off and go to bed. When is it going to stop?
So I don't think there's any coincidence that the increase in Asian hate, the increase in African American hate and white supremacy has come from the top. Comes from the top. But we're here because we're the top in this community. The city council members, the assembly members, the board members, we're in a position to do it on a local level. And so we're convened today for that reason to, in some respects, ignore the flames and the embers that are ongoing on a federal level and bring it home. And, it's incredible the power of people locally when we put our minds to something. People are impacted by their neighbors. And if we can create means locally to engage together, to have just community gatherings to talk with each other, it could have a huge effect locally, I think. Yes?
I'm Dr. David Silverman. I'm a clinical psychologist, past president of the County Psychological Association, so Untitled. Just want to give you a little help. There's a technique called psychological first aid. You have an iPhone or any other phone, there's an app for it. It is a way to help reduce some of the distress, because if you're paying attention here, it must really trouble you. And if you've experienced hate, you can have nightmares behind it, and this is a way to not have it. I treat PTSD, I prevent PTSD. And what I'm suggesting is that, limit the number of people you're talking to about your own trauma, because everyone has an opinion, and instead, take your own wisdom. So I'm not saying you have to rush off to a therapist, but if you have a question, or you're not sleeping, or you're really troubled by this, Call up. And by the way, the way to find a therapist, don't ask them if they have an opening in their practice. Tell them you need help. Every one of us does this to help people. If you say you need help, we tend to respond, find a place for you to get treatment. But there is a shortage of us. It takes a long time to train us. So, and the problem is in the Asian community, which is, by the way, 80% of my practice, the job doesn't pay very well. And so it's very hard to support a family on what psychologists get paid. And so, that's another topic for another day. But what I'm saying is we need, I'm here as an ally, and I'll help all I can.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you. Can I stand up? Hi. I'm a proud husband of an elected office.
Mike, it's hard to hear you. Can you take your...
Sorry. Hi, I'm a proud husband of a first non-Caucasian councilwoman of Hillsborough. I'm also a Taekwondo instructor. With this experience, I actually seen and experienced many discrimination in every level. Not only the common people are bullied and discriminated and attacked. I want to share that there are also elected office being bullied and discriminated because of their colors, skin of their color. I once stopped a fight on the street, but I cannot help that when somebody I know dearly being bullied. I am American by choice, not by chance. I just want to say that we need to stand together to fight this discrimination in all levels, not just on the street, but also in the office. We need to stand together. We need to stand behind the person who is representing us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike.
Hi, thank you for having me on some airtime. I actually wanted to speak to the clinical psychologist comment. Thank you for mentioning the resource, because I actually neglected to share that there's a wealth of resources out on the table, and also want to mention that BHRS, the Behavioral Health and Recovery Services, serves youth, adults, older adults, and AOD, providing services in your native language. So I just want to make sure that that's noted, that there are culturally and linguistically appropriate services out there. And it's mostly for uninsured and those who have Medi-Cal, but if you have a private provider, don't wait. Don't wait till it's chronically getting to a point where, you're chronically depressed or anything like that. I mean, this is the time to take care of yourself. And also, if you have any questions about other resources, again, I'm part of the Filipino Mental Health Initiative, and I can provide that information.
Thank you, Stephanie. What Mike said is very personal to me, because my father was an immigrant. And when you say American by choice, not by chance, it's very powerful. That's a great message. Thank you, Mike.
Hi, my name is Jeffrey Lee. I'm the president of Huaying Club in San Francisco, Chinatown. I'm a native born, first generation. And I'll make it quick. I was a victim, 1986. I have an older daughter that was assaulted twice. In 86, she was only 5 years old. We were just driving in Pacifica, in a shopping center. Midday, witnesses, shoppers all around us, and this perpetrator comes out with a brick block and smashes it into my driver's window and explodes, and my daughter's just frantic. 35 years later, last month, she was assaulted in Japantown, midday, and she's asking, Dad, why are we reliving the past? What's happening? Are we going backwards? And because of this, I've united with the leaders of all colors, along with our partners, SF Cause, to bring the minorities together to become a majority and vote down the bad bills and politicians, and to educate all our kids and put untold stories surface so that everyone really knows the facts of why all this is happening. We've been just hiding this all these decades. It's not just now. It's been going on. We were the very first Asian family that bought a house in the Richmond district in San Francisco, and we were discriminated, segregated, prejudiced, everything else. We had to fight our way, but we became stronger, and we will continue to do that. But it's time for us all to come together and act. Otherwise, we're going to continue this. So please join us.
How about from some of the elected city council members who are here? Any comments, thoughts, ideas? Gina?
I just want to encourage everybody, if any member of your family, anyone, is the victim of a crime, report it. Please, we still have, every day, it seems to happen even in our own city. You hear, oh, well, somebody was harassed, or we had a smash and grab at Walgreens, and Walgreens didn't report it. Please, help us come together as a community. And I know some people, especially first generation, they're frightened or they don't want to report things. But please, we are all here to help each other. Report a crime if you see one or you know someone who's been the victim of a crime. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Councilwoman Beer from Pacifica.
I think we have an opportunity here, to my colleagues, for all of us to come together. You know, you mentioned task force. Sign me up. We just had a flag burning in Pacifica over the weekend, the LGBTQ pride flag. So it's happening everywhere. It's happening to our colleagues and our friends. We can't stop talking about it. And thank you, Stephanie, for bringing up all the resources that are available in our communities, because there's core service agencies in each of our communities. So please reach out for help, because the help is there. But really, I'm here. Sign me up.
Thank you, Mary. Can we have Police Chief Ed Barberini come up? Emily Beach from City of Burlingame, Councilwoman, and then we'll have Police Chief from San Mateo, Ed Barberini.
Thank you, Congresswoman Spear, for convening this. You know, I just want to encourage all cities to think about participating in United Against Hate Week. It's been a powerful source of good in our community, and bringing people together for a planning committee to have different themes. I know in 2020, when the horrible murder of George Floyd happened, we had a lot of racial justice themes around Black Lives Matters, but perhaps this year we should really focus on AAPI hate, and hope every community will take that seriously come this November for United Against Hate Week. Thank you.
Please.
Good afternoon, Congresswoman. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the invitation. For those who don't know me, my name is Ed Barberini. I serve as the police chief in the city of San Mateo. I've been asked to talk briefly about some of the training and some of the things we do from a law enforcement perspective when it comes to hate crimes.
Why don't you come up,
You want to come
up here?
Sorry, I'll save your necks and I'll walk up. As District Attorney Wagstaff mentioned, there is clear and specific legislation regarding what a hate crime is, but as well as encouraging all of you and the public about the nuances and the specifics of the statute, it's important that we train our law enforcement personnel as well. And we've made a conscious effort throughout, both in the city of San Mateo and throughout the county, to do that. And it's not just a one-time training session, it's ongoing training that's built into our training programs to ensure that our staff remains familiar with what exactly a hate crime is and what it isn't. And why is that important? Oftentimes we get calls of instances that are reported as hate crimes. And as Mr. Wagstaff mentioned, sometimes those meet the elements of the crime and sometimes they don't. Other times we just get reported to crimes that are just reported as crimes and not always obvious and maybe a little bit more subtle. And it's important that our law enforcement personnel recognize what a hate crime is. So when they respond to those types of crimes, they ask themselves why. Why did this crime occur? Why did whoever committed this crime act in the manner that they did? And without the training and the ongoing emphasis and familiarity with what the statute really means and says, some of those may slip through the cracks. And even the reporting party may not recognize it as a hate crime. But if we as law enforcement are not familiar and educated on what the law and the statute really means, it'll get past us too. So we've made a conscious effort in not only being a public voice in opposition to hate and letting folks know that there is no tolerance for these types of acts, but also to educate our staff, make sure that we remain current with what the law says, so that we don't see these types of things just kind of occur and not recognize them when they do. So that's a quick synopsis of our training and our approach from a law enforcement perspective in this county. I will say I'm very proud and happy to be part of the law enforcement community in this county, and with Mr. Wagstaff, I think that we do a really good job in both this area and others in working together to address this. But it is kind of funny, you mentioned Mothers Against Drunk Driving and human trafficking. We should have been way ahead of this years ago, and we react to certain laws and certain in what the legislature does. But we're also sometimes reactive, and sometimes we don't know what we don't know. So it's good to attend events like this to make sure that we stay current in that. So, thank you. Sure, absolutely.
Verbal assaults, are they legal? Can you ticket people? Can you cite them? Can you slap them? What can you...
So as Mr. Wagstaff, and there's an attorney in the room, so it's kind of intimidating to answer a legal question. But no, as Mr. Wagstaff had mentioned, speech itself is not necessarily illegal. There are certain speeches, there are certain times when speech can be illegal. You can't yell fire in a crowded movie theater, anything to incite, to challenge somebody to fight when there's a means to do so. But simply yelling derogatory language, though, unfortunately, that's right now, that's not something that we would take enforcement action on. If there's a threat of violence and the person making that threat has a means to carry out that threat, there is a code section that would apply, and the hate crime section would apply if we met if that threat met the level of criminality. But if it's just derogatory language not accompanied by a threat or anything else, it's not enforceable. Uh-oh.
Yeah, a lot of the questions regarding street harassment and verbal assaults. We found at Stop AAPI Hate that 2/3 of our cases involve verbal harassment. So focusing on this issue as a hate crime issue is really limited, because if you frame the issue as hate crimes, then the only thing you can do is hate crimes enforcement, and that's really difficult. But if 2/3 of the cases involve harassment, then we have to deal with it at that issue. And because we have First Amendment rights, it's hard to address it. What we at Stop AAPI Hate are proposing, and it's now a bill proposed at the State Assembly, is to not address harassment as a penal issue that you can enforce, but as a public health issue. So I think this is a real novel way, an innovative way of addressing it. We want to go upstream and prevent the racism before it occurs, right? We want to educate people to become anti-racist. So and as Congressman Spear says, until you name the issue, you can't really address it. So what we're calling on the Public Health Department is to name and define street harassment and discuss the harm it has on the community. Racism harms all of us, even the perpetrator. So if this bill goes through, the Public Health Department will have to define harassment, and it'll create a public education campaign to prevent the harassment. We know that women of color disproportionately are impacted by this. My kids, they can't ride the bus because they get harassed. My wife is afraid to take BART, right? Because, you know. And so addressing street harassment on this level with an educational approach, I think is what we're trying to do again. And so we hope you support this bill. I don't actually have the bill number, but it is sponsored by, again, in terms of racial solidarity, it's sponsored by the AAPI Legislative Caucus and Assemblywoman Bonta, who's Black Latina, and Assemblywoman Weber, who's African American. So this is an approach that's multiracial, that affects women of color, and we're trying to get at racism at its roots.
Thank you, Dr. Jung. You know, my favorite thing to do is craft legislation, as you know. So I would like to suggest that one of the do-outs from this town hall is for those who are interested to let my office know. We'll convene a group along with our district attorney and police chief to look at what would be feasible. We made hate a crime. Can we make harassment subject to a fine, to some administrative action, intimidation? I mean, we've got to make those forms of conduct abnormal. They are abnormal, but make them so abnormal that people will be reluctant. You cannot shout fire in a crowded theater. We know that. So I think we need to look at what we can do in that regard. And then for those that want, I mean, I would love to see coming out of this, each of the city councils that are represented here convene something locally within your community that would help, and maybe some of the speakers who participated today could be participants as well. Did you have a...
Voting and everything, there's so much important clarity and education that this will need on so many issues. But on this one, Robert Thomas does this wonderful show on Sunday mornings that one still does, and it goes through all the different cultural art, all the AAPI communities, and it's so diverse, and I find that so compelling to learn about all the cultures that AAPI represents, from India to all the different, Vietnam, China, and Tonga, and, and the dancing, and I went to the Heritage Award ceremony, and it was just like, oh my God, it was amazing. So I just think that that's such a great way to get preventative, get to know, familiarization is one of the things I say about the elderly, that also totally breaks my heart. I have a 92-year-old father. So I can relate to him on that, is that when that dude, one woman who fought back, she was so, bad, bad A-S-S. Oh my God, she was so amazing, and she's such a hero, this woman that fought back. I don't know if you know the street, someone came after her, and she just went right back at him, and said, you go, girl. So,
Okay.
Anyway, that's it.
Thank you. Mayor of South San Francisco, Mark Nicholls.
It's okay, I'm a staffer, so former staffer. My name is Mark Nicholls. I'm the mayor of South San Francisco. Congresswoman, thank you for putting this together. You were talking about a regional task force. I wanted to mention that a couple of us elected officials actually convened on Friday about the same idea of creating this regional task force to tackle this issue. So we would love to work with your office moving forward, so how we can work together. I wanted to mention just a brief story. I posted on my Facebook page celebrating Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And in honor of that, I read a story about a Filipino grandmother and how this Filipino grandmother was very close to her grandchild. And it made me remember my grandmother. And when I posted that, someone responded with a racist remark. And I was so angry at that. I responded back and I said, hate does not exist in South San Francisco. I won't let that happen in South San Francisco. And I called her out. And I went on the next day at the city council meeting, I said, we are an inclusive city. We're a loving city. I'm going to win each and every day because I'm going to show up and you're going to see my face at this dais because love is always going to win. And that's the response I did, and I know that many of you are going to do as well. And I just wanted to share that story and say thank you to our elected officials here and all of you for showing up. I look forward to working with you, Congresswoman, on this regional task force. So thank you very much.
Steve, I have a question. Steve, do you have access to a perpetrator's social media? Do you not, to determine whether or not they...
I'm sorry. A perpetrator that
you said in one of the cases that you talked about, you couldn't charge a hate crime. You do have access to their social media, do you not?
Very much.
When
Yes.
you're evaluating whether
Very
or not
much.
someone...
And if we could have linked that in, there was not anything, but you're right. We have to show that's the reason they were committing the crime.
Okay, thank you. Yes. Of course. And then we're going to have to wrap it up. We've got two. So let's take your question or each of your comments and questions. And okay, there's...
Hi, my name is Anthony, Civic Leadership USA. Thank you, Mayor, for bringing this up because San Mateo City, City Council, and with about 20-some elected officers, yesterday we called an AAPI task force, formulating and bring all the resources and trying to work together. I'm so glad that, and then the next thing I know, I also received your invitation that you call on with that attention. It is time we talk enough. Let's put some action and work together. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you. I'm Dennis Wu. I'm chairman of an organization called SF Cause in San Francisco. And I just want to share an idea with all of you. In San Francisco, as we've heard before, the definition of hate is a very high threshold. So what we created with the police department is a hotline. It's a special number. It's 415-558-5588. And it's in 9 languages. We started out in Cantonese and English, so people can call non-911 incidents, and people are encouraged to call that number, and someone will come back to them and speak to them in a specific language. And so sometime in March, that was expanded to other languages, and now we also have it in Cantonese, Mandarin, Spanish, Tagalog, Russian, Vietnamese, Korean, Japanese, and Thai. And I'd like to suggest that you folks in San Mateo think about having a number that you can all share, so at least you can encourage people to report them, and we'll have better data on the incidences. Professor's group here have done a great job of collecting incidences, but we suspect that there's a lot more of it. And if you do that, because a lot of this is affecting immigrants and I think perpetrators can kind of spot who might be an immigrant who may not be able to speak English well and probably may not report it. And that's the reason why we did this in 9 languages. And it doesn't cost that much. So thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. My name is Michael Kelly. I'm one of the co-founders of the Millbrae Anti-Racist Coalition. And I just wanted to thank Congresswoman Spear and everyone else that's spoken. I want to make mention that with racism being found as a contributing factor to health-related issues, in Oakland, they've acknowledged that, and they're protecting policies that prevent racism. And here in Millbrae, with Vice Mayor Gina Pappin's help, we put together a proposal to form a social equity commission. Councilman Fung is on that as well, but somehow it got renamed cultural inclusion. Hopefully, though, we can bring this element into getting what South San Francisco did. The mayor, I commend you, you've got a social equity officer. So there's policies. You know, we did a lot to raise awareness. Now we're looking to affect policy change and get into the point where we can do social equity as part of a commission in Millbrae. It was really unfortunate that was Councilmember Fung that was injured, but racism exists in Millbrae. We know that. A lot of people like to argue about it, but the legacy of Millbrae, housing covenants, everything, it's all documented. So the more we can do about it, I would implore Congressman Fung, Vice Mayor Pappin, let's move forward with the Social Equity Commission so we can actually affect policy change. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you all for joining us today. I want to thank all of our speakers. You were outstanding. You have lit a fire, a good fire. I guess we shouldn't use that as a metaphor anymore. But I'm very excited by what we've heard and the suggestions that have been made. And for any of you that would like to participate in a gathering that we will have to look at what kind of action we can take, and then maybe roll it out throughout the county, we will do that because I'm running out of time. So we'll do that in the next couple of months. And just you can sign up at the table outside. But again, thank you all for joining us. This is really important. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for watching this MCTV original. To support local production, donate at mctv.tv. Thank you.